Welcome to the Kaleidoscope, Healthcare in a Diverse America, from molecule to market, with your host, Sheila Thorne. Each episode highlights healthcare leaders and patients of color to discuss culturally, linguistically appropriate strategies and services. You can find this show on all major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, SheilaThorne.com. Now here's the host of the Kaleidoscope, Sheila Thorne.
Clinical research is the foundation for the practice of evidence-based medicine. It stands to reason that the more diverse the clinical trial participants are, the more confidence physicians will have in the benefits and the efficacy and safety of the drug or the device or the intervention. So this is critical in terms of identifying what particular products, what particular kind of products or category of products will work effectively in all people. And that includes people of color. But when it comes to clinical research, there's good news and bad news. The good news is age and gender has always been critical components or factors in recruitment and retention of participants. Women were not always that good, but we've caught up. The bad news is race and ethnicity as significant factors to be included in clinical research has been sadly overlooked for far too long. And that's just an indication of the cultural deficit in the industry, the racial chasm in terms of clinical research. And here's what I mean. It was in 1985 that the FDA required sponsors of new drug applications to present efficacy and safety in racial subgroups. In 1988, they continued encouraging, now notice that word, encouraging the industry to be inclusive of diverse populations and groups. In 1993, the National Institutes of Health released information that of all federally funded clinical trials, you must have a proportionate number of people of color. But that was only encouraged. That was only on a voluntary basis. The industry-directed mandate did not come until 2022. Why in the world did it take so long? This is not about race. This is about good science. So in 2022, the U.S. House of Representatives passed legislation to increase diversity of the populations enrolled in clinical trials. Sponsors would be required to submit a diversity action plan, including goals for study enrollment according to demographic groups and steps for achieving these goals. Well, a new day has dawned, and it's about time. Now, most of the clinical trials that take place, and the majority do take place in industry trials, now must have a plan. It's now a mandate. That opened a whole new door. And clearly, it's an opportunity for people of color to not only be comfortable with clinical research, but to participate. And the science we can learn from that is astronomical. We saw what happened with the clinical trial recruitment for COVID-19 vaccine. It's the closest I've ever seen to come to represent the demographics of this country. Why did it take so long? Clearly, the industry must catch up, and they're trying. Some very forward-thinking progressive industry leaders were doing this for quite a while. I've worked on about 14 clinical trials where increasing diversity was the goal in my 27-year career. And I've worked on race-specific trials as well. But now the new day has dawned, as I said, and we're heading into an era that's requiring recruitment and retention of diverse populations so that subgroup analyses can make sure that we are confident that drugs, devices, and interventions are safe and effective in everyone. Well, I have a guest tonight who's going to enlighten us even further because this has now reached Mayo Clinic. And I'm so proud and so happy to introduce to you the new Dean of Clinical Trials of Mayo Clinic, Dr. Owen Garrick.
Well, thanks, Sheila. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. It is great to see you again.
Thank you so much, Owen. I think you and I, probably first met at an NMA meeting, passing in the hallways and trying to see and network and meet people who were doing exciting things. And boy, you've had quite a journey in terms of this whole effort. So I want to share that with the audience before we talk about what you're doing at Mayo Clinic. First and foremost, Dr. Garrick earned his a degree in psychology from Princeton, his medical degree, MD degree from Yale School of Medicine, his MBA from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. My goodness, my goodness. So you have been preparing for this day, undoubtedly. But more importantly, your position before this was as medical director for CVS Health, where you were chief medical officer for clinical trial services. And under your guidance and leadership, CVS Health enrolled more than 36,000 participants in U.S. clinical trials, representing 5% of all study participants in the country. Your strategy, your passion, and your commitment certainly has borne fruit. So congratulations, and so proud of you, Owen.
Well, thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate that.
Well, October 30th last year, you were brought into Mayo Clinic community, and you became the Dean of Clinical Trials. You started that new position almost 6 months now. So I think you've probably gotten your feet wet a little bit at this point.
A little bit indeed.
Yes, indeed, I'm sure. So how does Mayo Clinic envision transforming clinical trials? Because I read that was your goal.
Yes. So there are going to be a few ways. One, and one of the interests I've had in coming here when it's Mayo Clinic, right? So a world-class institution already doing world-class research. And so for us, as we think about transformation, it's really thinking through how we provide more access to the clinical research that is going on here at the Mayo Clinic, right? So many others have an opportunity to engage in that research. And as you mentioned earlier, this notion of we study small populations in trials because you can't study everyone.
Right.
And that small population should reflect and represent the larger population that will eventually or could potentially be treated by the new drug or therapy or device. And you can have that comfort in knowing that it works in those populations because it was actually studied. That those populations or all populations were part of the study group. So for one big part of transformation was it's going to be really about increasing that access. And we're going to do that twofold. One, whether you call it decentralized or distributed clinical trials. So going beyond the four walls of Mayo, even though there are a few campuses within Mayo, but really reaching out into the communities. And that will look a little different. In Rochester, Minnesota, it'll be more rural populations.
Yes.
At the Jacksonville site, it'll be probably more of a focus on African Americans. And in the Phoenix and Scottsdale area, it'll be more Hispanic and Native Americans. So that is hopefully giving you a flavor of information.
Wow, and that's major, obviously. And the Native American community, my team and I have been working on one reservation for the past 2 years. That clearly is a population that has been overlooked. And I think your role in leadership in that regard is going to be critically important.
Agreed.
Well, what about the Mayo Clinic itself? What are the challenges that you've been confronted with? What are some of the things that you have noticed that you will hopefully be a part of making certain transformation?
The biggest issue I have seen is bandwidth, right?
Really?
Mayo sees 1 million, 2 patients a year, and it's frankly at capacity, right? So the biggest challenge thus far I've seen is literally providing access to anyone, right? If you're sort of booked so far out, it is a bit of a challenge. And then what you want to manage is maintaining the quality of professional and care you can provide, but also managing burnout, right? We see this, we hear about it a lot, and I see it. I have friends that are physicians and nurses and PAs. So this issue of clinician burnout is real. So we have to balance that need, that just overwhelming demand to be seen and be cared for within a Mayo facility by Mayo clinicians, with, just like I said, the bandwidth and the sheer number of the limited number of physicians and clinicians, which equals a finite number of slots that we have to care for patients. So figuring out how we do that, and that's why when I mentioned transformation, right? So part of this will be leveraging technology, part of it will be digital, part of it will also be figuring out how we impart the Mayo way and culture to other entities, right? So they can start doing things and treating patients in a very effective manner.
Yeah, the great need that's out there, and certainly having experienced, proficient clinicians leading up that charge is challenging. Even for the industry, it's challenging as well, because you've done a lot of work with industry in that respect as well.
Right.
Yeah. So clearly, that's a challenge, but it's a good challenge, because you want to make sure that you can provide the very best for all populations. So let me ask you about that in terms of what are the factors that will lead to adequate representation in clinical research? What should the industry be looking for?
Right. So I think there's one thing, and I've learned this, and you mentioned my work at CVS. When adequate representation is integrated and a part of what you do every day, that's when you have success.
Yes.
So you mentioned 36,000 patients at CVS that we were able to recruit to clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
A good 30+% of those were from diverse backgrounds.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And that is simply a factor of it was our interest and focus from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of when I joined CVS, the clinical trials group, it was in essence a startup, right?
Uh-huh.
So the leadership was committed. We did the things you and I have talked about for years, hired
Yes.
from the community. Those that were helping develop the research questions were from the
Yes.
community, reflected the community.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this natural trust and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So as we developed content, as we decided where to place research sites,
Uh-huh.
right? Those were all that notion of representation and diverse populations, as I mentioned from the beginning. So similarly, we're doing things here. The beauty of my role here at Mayo and many others across the industry, now you have a good number of folks who have grown up in the system, right? In the research enterprise, whether that be industry, research sites, academic medical centers, insurers.
Mm-hmm.
And now there are people of color in leadership roles where we understand not just the commitment to the community, but how do you scale and sustain those efforts?
Very important.
You don't have to go to business school to think through that or realize that, but part of my training has helped me always keep that in mind.
Yes. And that 30% of that 36,000, were there any special retention programs or techniques or strategies that were used to keep them in the trials?
Yeah, great question. And so as we thought through retention, right? So a big part of retention is being proactive and developing communication strategies.
Yes.
So one of the beauties and benefits of the structure at CVS was that our research sites were open after 9 to 5 hours on weekends.
Okay.
Right. So, and then we afforded individuals the opportunity to schedule when it was most convenient to them.
Mm-hmm.
And as we thought through reminders, whether that be texts or phone calls or content, it was the messages, the materials, the visuals were all designed by diverse populations and thus reflected, and I should say more importantly, resonated with all members of the community.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Owen, about the selection of the sites, because traditionally in the industry, they've used sites that they've traditionally used year after year after year. Mm-hmm. And some of them are not even accessible by these diverse populations. Transportation becomes an issue, cost of transportation, all of those things kick in. So what you've done, or what you did at CVS, and I'm sure what you do at Mayo, is to really look at what it takes to lessen the burden of clinical research for these patients. Am I on the right track with that?
You're absolutely right. So this notion of research burden, right? So the burden of participating, as you mentioned, some of those issues, but also the burden of physicians and principal investigators engaging in research. So here at Mayo, we have, I mentioned the doctors are super busy, right? So managing both your clinical practice as well as engaging in clinical trials, you want to reduce the burden for them as well. So those are some of the things, I'll spare you the sausage making of, but those are some of the things we're doing jointly, right? Making it easy for our clinicians to do research. But to your point, right? So as we think about the biggest reason we're thinking about decentralized trials is you can do things like remote monitoring, televisits, in-home visits, right? And the in-home visit could just be for blood or other specimen collection, which could also do what we call an entire protocol visit, right? So the same visit you might do at a Mayo or at another commercial site that a patient might have or a research participant may have to come to, you can do in the home or maybe a location that's more convenient for the research participant, right? So pushing these services and the ability to engage in research further out into the community, because like I mentioned, Mayo is in essence, 3 main campuses. And so that physical infrastructure is in many respects set, but we do have the ability, right, to engage with either community health centers or other partners within the communities that have an interest in doing research and certainly have the patient populations.
Yes, you mentioned that partnership, and we hear that over and over again with regards to outreach and engagement of communities of color. We can't do this alone. The industry doesn't have all the answers, and it certainly doesn't have a bottomless pit of money. So you need the right partners in the room, people who look like you and me, people who speak the language of that population. And you brought up another point, Owen, the 9 to 5 mentality of many of the sites. And I understand that. Everybody wants to go home and be with family, but can you set aside a Saturday morning or a few evenings in the week for people whose schedules do not fit into that 9 to 5 agenda? Is that something that would be viable for helping patients?
I think it'd be super viable, right? Because, you and I work probably traditional hours, probably beyond traditional hours, right?
Yes.
But if we have to go to the doctor, we're fortunate where we have jobs or careers that give us that flexibility.
Yes.
So I don't necessarily, there are certainly meetings I'm committed to, but I without a doubt I don't do shift work, right? Of any kind, right?
Yes.
So I have the ability to go to my doctor. But I just went to I had an eye appointment a couple of days ago at noon.
Okay.
Right? I had the ability to do that.
Yes.
Many others don't. So and we probably shouldn't call them extended hours anymore, right? Because
that's right.
Realizes that 9 to 5 should be the normal thing, but just hours of operation. And we have seen, I think many others have seen, that when you afford individuals the ability to come on weekends, they will do that because that's what they're generally doing, other non-work things, outside of work hours.
Right. This just life stuff, you like to be with your family. And you're so right. I remember working on a trial in Los Angeles, and I happened to be at the site to talk to the clinical research team and the PI. And as I was sitting there, a gentleman came in. He was part of the study and he was doing what he had to do. But I left when he left, and his bicycle was parked outside the building. And it was a Latino. And I started chatting with him, and I said, "So how are you getting home?" And he says, "Well, the bus that comes here stops running at 5 o'clock." Right. And he said, "I had to come tonight." He rode his bicycle 5 miles to come to the site. So is there a way that we could have helped him get a better way of transportation after a full day of work? He had to get on his bicycle. So the site team, and we've talked about this, is Owen, has to be cognizant of the lifestyle of the participants so that they can proactively help them to do a better job of showing up, coming on time, and all of that. So that takes some observation.
Agreed. And I don't want to minimize this notion of, extending hours is not an easy thing.
No, it's not.
To your point, right? Folks want to go home. Their kids are home. Their family, the rest of their family is home.
Yeah.
They're tired after a long day, right? They need to cook, prepare a meal, or they just, want to socialize.
Right.
So, and then you also have to think about how do you effectively scale and utilize that, right?
Yes.
So if you have those hours beyond the traditional 9 to 5 and Monday through Friday, and no one comes, right? That's a waste of time and resource. So you really need to match, and make sure the demand actually matches. Because for instance, Tuesday in a community may be a bad night, but Wednesday, Thursday are really good nights. So doing a bit of planning, testing before you open things up full throttle, I think would be important.
Absolutely. And what would you say, Owen, about the cultural consciousness of the site team? Is there anything we can do to help that? Because most of the site teams that I see don't have people that look like me. And if I'm Black and I'm coming to the site, I mean, I'm maybe a little uncomfortable with that.
I would agree. And so the question is, who do you hire, train, and promote?
Yes.
Right. Which gets back to my point. If this is fundamentally something you do and think about, and as part of what you think and do every day, you will make sure, right, that you're proactively hiring, training, and promoting to leadership roles members, people that look like the community.
Yes.
And so you don't, I won't say have to, you don't have to, but this notion of cultural relevance and competency is less of an issue because you have staff that is from the community and can engage naturally.
Right, exactly. I know you have worked extensively with the National Black Nurses Association, National Association of Hispanic Nurses, and there are other groups, retired clinicians in the community. I've even brought some of them in on visit days so that they're sitting in the reception area, kind of making people feel comfortable and getting information that the clinical team may not be able to get. So that partnership is a critical component. Does that site team understand who are the gatekeepers in the community? Who are the trusted messengers? Maybe it's a pastor, you know, a nurse, a pharmacist. That's the way you have to really engage community, and that's culturally culturally friendly. And so that becomes critical important. Yes.
And I would, I want to sort of re-emphasize the point, right? To the degree that you are bringing in others, that's still a Band-Aid.
Absolutely.
Right? You're not correcting the structural problem that your staff does not reflect the community.
Exactly.
And once you begin to do that, right, then you don't necessarily have to pay for those additional resources that you're bringing in.
That's right.
And I think either more or certainly as importantly, you have a better understanding of the medical needs of the community, and you begin to ask different research questions.
Yes.
You begin to ask questions and test things and study things that are relevant for the population that you're caring for, because you are much more engaged with them and they are part of your organization.
So key, so important. And the principal investigator, whom the patients may not see on a regular basis, is also a critical component. More PIs of color need to be in the mix, and that's certainly an attraction, isn't it?
It is, no question.
So in terms of what your role is at Mayo Clinic and what you see, I hope we can have you back on after the next 6 months and see how you survive. What do you hope to see that changes, or what is your vision of the role that you have, such a critically important role?
So I think a few things. One, our ability to reduce both participant and researcher burden, that will be success, right? And the way we'll be able to track that, right, is you will see those that historically have not participated because there has been more burden participating in our studies, right, which should lead to improved representation and increase or adequate representation in studies. That's one. And I will also think, getting back to this point, you should be seeing us asking and studying different research questions, right? So not just the research questions that all the academic medical centers are doing, but the research questions. We have this program here called Citizen Scientist, right, where members of the community are helping us think through what are truly the pressing medical needs. And they may not be just access to a vaccine. Might be environmental factors that are impacting your health, nutrition factors that are impacting your health. So you'll begin to see us studying more of those issues that are relevant, in addition to the newest flu vaccine, right? The newest high cholesterol medication, more the integration of the environment and biology, which I think will be important.
Yeah, I mean, those social determinants that we've been talking about for the last decade clearly come into the fore with clinical research. It's a serious commitment to be in a clinical trial and long term. And you can't expect people to turn over their whole life for this clinical study, and yet you want to keep them in. So the best way is to make sure that all of those dynamics are addressed proactively, not after the fact, because they'll just stop coming. So you don't want to lose them. So it takes conversation, it takes observation, it takes really being with the right partners. So that's critically important. So you're being recorded here, and I'm going to ask you the next question, so you can answer however you want. What do you like most about your job?
Oh, the people.
Really?
There's a fantastic culture here. Really, really smart people. Not obnoxious. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there are a few sharp elbows here and there, but just some really smart, committed folks that are great to work with. They have welcomed me. They're happy that I'm here. And they are, joining this vision I have of, community-based research. So, and not just in voice, but in terms of real resources and people. Really committed to this.
Awesome. Well, I can certainly say on behalf of people of color that I work with, professionals and patients, we're happy that you're there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Because we see that your voice and your experience, my God, I mean, you've done so much, and you clearly are still ready to give more. And now from a global perspective. So we're excited about your presence. We'll look forward to hearing more of this transformation strategy that you're going to be leading. We clearly understand that once you get to Mayo Clinic, okay, you may not have reached the top of the mountain, but you're close. You're close.
Indeed.
Yes. And hope to see you this summer at the National Medical Association meeting in New York.
I am there, no question. I already have my reservation. I will be there indeed. Looking forward to seeing you, if not before then.
Exactly. And you always know you can reach out to me or any of my team, because we are committed to this effort. We know that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And diversity in clinical research is no longer an option. It's got to be a part of that journey from molecule to market if we're going to help people live better, live longer, no matter what they look like, what language they speak, or where they come from. Any advice you want to give to our audience who are involved in clinical research in terms of their challenges with diversity?
Yeah, I would say one. So if I think about the audience, right, I'll take it twofold. From the perspective of a patient or potential research participant, I'll start there.
Okay.
Always ask questions, right? Until you get the answers and you feel comfortable. The research team should be able to answer your questions, right? And frankly, I'll be frank, if they can't, that might not be the place or the study for you.
Okay.
But make them answer your questions. The second thing is, if I think about those within the research enterprise, I'll be frank, I've had fantastic opportunities and times working with you. So, individuals like you, I think, are great at helping solve these long-standing problems and challenges. There are some really, really good resources out there. So continue to reach out to them and be open about your needs, your challenges you see with the community, and be open to learn.
That's really the key. Yeah, curiosity, that openness, broader perspective, asking the right questions, talking to clinicians who are of color, because they've lived in this skin a long time. And I think they can obviously give you insights as well. But Dr. Owen Garrick, clearly a leader in this space who has done a lot of work and a lot of research. He's lived it, he's walked it. And clearly at Mayo Clinic, we know that you're going to help all of us do a better job of making sure that all the drugs and devices and regimens are effective and safe in everyone. We salute you and we thank you, and we'll be watching for you.
Sheila, thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Good night. Thank you so much.
You've been tuning into the Kaleidoscope, Healthcare in a Diverse America, From Molecule to Market, with your host, Sheila Thorne. You can find more episodes on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, SheilaThorne.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.